Right now, it's a slap in the face to the Kremlin. Xi Jinping publicly humiliated bunker grandpa. China hit Putin hard, and Ukraine has begun. A sharp turn by Beijing. Russia is turning into a vassal under the Celestial Empire. The first details have exploded online. Sensational news. Germany has declared war on the Russian Federation. Berlin is launching a superweapon. Something incredible has already been sent to Ukraine. They're celebrating war with Europe. The Chancellor has burned all bridges. This decision will bring Moscow to its knees. Shock. Putin is beginning an invasion. Europe is on the brink of explosion. At this very moment, Poland and the Baltics are under threat. The Kremlin has crossed the red line. The countdown is on. The Baltic countries are preparing for evacuation. Trump has stepped in. This will change everything. Here we go. Counteroffensive by the AFU. Syrsky made a sensational statement. Victories that are being kept secret. The Russians were simply driven from the front. A meat grinder for the occupiers. Putin screamed when he heard about this. All this and more in our upcoming report. Hotspot. Global shock. Xi Jinping humiliated Putin in front of everyone. China has made a 180-degree turn. Moscow was left with nothing. Instead of support, the Kremlin got a slap in the face. Beijing cold-bloodedly threw its ally overboard. Russia is turning into a vassal under the Celestial Empire. A sensational twist. She did the unexpected. The first details of Russia's public humiliation. Watch.
China, Russia's main partner, helping it keep its economy afloat and wage war in Ukraine.
They shouted, "Come on, good job." Kleki, yes, good job. Kleki, yes, hooray. In Chinese,
I count on maintaining very close and continuous contacts with President Vladimir Putin in various important forms for the sake of the dynamic, robust, and long-term development of the significant Chinese-Russian relations.
But is that really the case? After all, at the same time, China denies selling weapons or components to Russia, and Chinese banks have stopped transactions with Russia because of sanctions.
Pairs, dozens, tens of millions of Chinese soldiers. Right now, that's exactly what we need. Exactly what we need.
Why do you think so?
Why not?
Why? Do you really think only soldiers should die?
I look at the Belgorod region. I think we really lack the Chinese army.
Very often we hear statements from China that China has never sold weapons to Russia, and that China stands for the territorial integrity of Ukraine and wants an end to the Russian-Ukrainian war.
Just 3 years ago, propagandists were rejoicing, saying, "Let Western companies leave, we'll buy everything from China."
now we've bought a wonderful, completely Chinese car. It's amazing. Many, many times cheaper than the cars we used to buy before. I bought myself 3 pairs of Gucci shoes, 2,000 rubles each. Wonderful. Probably made somewhere in China as well. I hope here too. Fake, of course. Now I buy them on principle. Only fakes.
There's no need to even comment on how that turned out. This most Chinese way of supporting the Russian economy has resulted in the bankruptcy of Russian manufacturers.
And just look at what, for example, the soldiers are driving. When it comes to Russian-made cars, you have to be a real patriot to drive a Patriot, because it costs a fortune. It breaks down all the time, because of the crazy spare parts. That's why the guys drive Chinese cars. And now they need motorcycles. Russian ones? No! For some reason, that's how it turns out, right? There are few Russian, and the Russian don't exist. There are no Russian motorcycles. Why is that, do you know?
If you look at the Federation from an economic perspective, the issue is that they simply use it as a basic sales market. As for things not related to, say, the military industry, civilian engineering is practically non-existent. It's as if it's been multiplied by 0.
And Russia has literally turned into a raw materials appendage for China. By the way, Foreign Minister Lavrov came up with a very apt metaphor, calling Putin and Xi Jinping guest and host.
As they say in the East, the guest follows the host's lead. That's why all the programs, of course, depend on the gracious proposals that the Chinese president and his team made to our president. Basically, everything China needs from an economic standpoint
Is cheap raw materials, which, by the way, the Russian Federation has quite a lot of. It's not just natural gas and crude oil, but also valuable lithium, high-quality timber, and a variety of quite valuable precious metals, and in fact, significant quantities of gold as well. In other words, all the things that are then used in China itself to produce goods for the whole world.
And this situation manifests itself in completely different aspects. China has officially approved new geographic maps on which part of Russian territory, the Bolshoi Ussuriysky Island, is recognized as Chinese territory. In fact, the Chinese have already settled huge parts of Siberia and turned the territory into their own colonies.
The Chinese dragon is unlikely to stay within its own borders, simply because it actually has, by the way, certain historical claims to a significant part of our Far East, and that's a fact.
Of course, at first there was enthusiasm, but gradually it faded, and eventually we all realized that Asina had become a Chinese colony. It's simply a slave-owning enterprise, or a slave-owning prison if you will, where they put overseers in place to keep the workers in line. Because there is still outrage, and workers in Asina have protested with the slogan, "Asina is not China." And they also regularly threaten, saying that you won't be able to get a job anywhere in this city. That's the law of the jungle for you. So just sit quietly for your 15 to 30,000 and keep your mouth shut.
They are very good at waiting, and this ability to wait is also about the integration of the Chinese on the territory of the Russian Federation. And in fact, this is already, for all intents and purposes, an annexation. Moreover, if you pay attention, on some Chinese maps, certain regions of the Russian Federation are already labeled with Chinese names. Well, listen, why would you even need to declare war for that, right?
Russian television is already showing videos about how to find a Chinese husband, and in Russian schools and government institutions, Chinese language is being actively studied.
It is divided into two camps. Those who want to study it and those who are skeptical and say, why do we need Chinese? We're not planning to go anywhere. I answer very simply, actually. I say, I'm not teaching you Chinese here, but using the Chinese language to make you think with your head. And that skill will always come in handy.
Putin constantly tries to characterize relations with China as a strong friendship, but Xi Jinping literally spat in his face. He took away from Russia that very great victory.
And just yesterday, my very good friend and esteemed representative of the People's Republic of China treated me to this truly delicious kind of authentic Peking duck. I'll be honest with you, there were 2 pieces and I thought I'd only eat 1. You get what I mean, right? But I couldn't resist. I ate the second one too, you know, it was just so delicious.
China and Russia, being the main theaters of military operations in World War II, made a decisive contribution to the victory over fascism and thus laid the cornerstone for the post-war world order.
China and Russia are neither friends nor partners. And here's what's important. As soon as China has enough motivation to limit its cooperation with the Russian Federation, believe me, it will do so. In fact, Russia has no other choice, either be friends with China now or face economic collapse and as a consequence political, military and all other kinds of collapse at the same time.
It turns out that China is not helping Russia save its economy or win the war at all, but is simply taking advantage of its weakness to seize its resources and strengthen its influence in Asia.
A sensation. Germany has gone on the offensive against Putin. Merz has broken off diplomatic ties. Berlin is deploying its superweapon. The Kremlin is on the verge of collapse. Europe is preparing for a new era of strength. What awaits Moscow now, and how will this turn the tide at the front? Watch right now.
Germany has announced an expansion of cooperation with Ukraine and Israel. A new unit will be created within the federal police, which will be dedicated exclusively to future protection against drones. Ukraine will also receive 2 more Patriot systems from Germany by the end of 2025, with the support of Norwegian partners.
Germany is one of the leaders when it comes to supplying Ukraine with air defense systems. These are specifically the Patriot surface-to-air missile systems, plus missiles for the Patriots PAC-2 and PAC-3. There are also IRST systems. It should be noted that in addition, Gepards are also being supplied. These again are short-range air defense systems. It is quite remarkable that the German side is building a layered air defense system for Ukraine.
Since the start of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, Germany has been the largest European donor of military aid.
In addition to air defense systems, Germany has supplied Ukraine with heavy armored vehicles. These include Leopard 2 and Leopard 2 A6 tanks. These are among the most modern types of armored vehicles in their class. In addition, of course, this includes the delivery of infantry fighting vehicles. Furthermore, Germany, in cooperation with its partners, is financing the transfer of strike weapons to Ukraine. This refers to the Caesar self-propelled howitzers.
In September, Berlin launched a new initiative to purchase long-range drones together with Ukraine's defense industry. worth 300 million euros.
It was Germany that was the first to propose an innovative formula for supporting the Ukrainian defense industry and financing long-range weapons programs. First and foremost, this concerns Ukrainian ballistic systems and the production of strike drones. The allocated amount is approximately $1.9 billion. This amount is sufficient to appropriately scale up the production of strike drones within the Ukrainian ballistic program, better known as Flaminda.
Germany has also moved to the next stage of providing military assistance to Ukraine, which involves Berlin purchasing weapons for Kiev from Ukrainian manufacturers, as well as joint production.
Germany fully understands that the Russian Federation plans to expand the theater of military operations, including on the European continent. And the first to face the threat of Russian invasion will be Germany itself. This is the Kaliningrad region. This is the former Prussia, which is currently temporarily part of the Russian Federation.
In 3.5 years of war, the German government has provided Ukraine with more than 50 billion euros in aid. For 2026, Berlin has already included military aid to Kiev in the draft state budget, as well as measures to increase its own combat readiness.
If in 2022 Germany spent 1.6 billion euros on aid to Ukraine, then by 2023 this amount was about 5 billion euros. And accordingly, in 2024 this amount was already about 7.5 billion euros. For the year 2025, the total amount of military technical assistance provided to Ukraine is currently planned to be approximately 9 billion euros. Moreover, a separate budget item is allocated for financing the production of Ukraine's ballistic program and Ukrainian long-range strike drones.
A year ago, Germany's largest defense company, Rheinmetall, together with Ukroboronprom, opened the first joint workshop for the repair and production of equipment. And in 2026, they plan to launch a plant for the production of ammunition on the territory of Ukraine.
This is the world's largest producer of artillery shells. It is Germany that has taken on the main responsibility for supplying 155mm artillery shells. And note that it was specifically the German company Rheinmetall that announced the establishment of production facilities in Ukraine, and we're talking about the production of artillery shells and a plant for repairing armored vehicles directly in Ukraine.
Let us recall that Germany has committed to providing Ukraine with 9 billion euros annually over the next few years.
Breaking news. The Ukrainian armed forces counteroffensive. Syrsky revealed the turning point. You will be shocked. War is on the doorstep. The Baltic countries are preparing for urgent evacuation, and this statement by Trump has turned the Kremlin upside down. Terrible things are happening and all the explosive news you might have missed. Next.
The killers are striking with cluster munitions. An ammonia pipeline has been blown up in Donbass. In response, Ukraine has set a fuel terminal in Crimea on fire for the 4th day.
In addition,
there are also many missed incidents in the Rostov region.
Oh, that one hit the oil depots.
And the US is ready to provide Kiev with new powerful weapons that could change the course of the war.
You know, they can literally inflict serious damage anywhere and anytime we choose.
NATO will now shoot down Russian drones in the skies over Europe.
If you enter Alliance airspace, you'll be shot down immediately. NATO has never had this right before. FT is writing new rules. This is a tough signal to Moscow and Tehran.
And this is how the Air Force destroys Russian Shaheds. Aliyev bent Putin in front of the whole world. He admitted that Russian air defense shot down the Azel plane. A live humiliation of the bunker dweller.
Aliyev wiped the floor with Putin. The dictator mumbled apologies and stared at the floor.
Trump's dream has collapsed.
Trump was not given the Nobel Peace Prize.
Now the US leader will take revenge on Norway.
He will increase trade tariffs for Norway.
Russia also got caught in the crossfire. Trump is ready to strike at Moscow.
Yes.
That's exactly what I would do.
Solovyov is having an autumn nuclear meltdown. Berlin. Paris.
Factories producing equipment that is being used against us. Let them start a full-scale war in the European Union. Absolutely right.
All the gasoline the occupied Crimea is returning to the USSR.
There is a fuel shortage which has already affected Moscow, the Moscow region, Crimea, and the Leningrad region. The situation is especially tense in the border regions of Kursk and Belgorod. Finding gasoline there has turned into a real lottery for drivers.
95-octane gasoline in Crimea costs 160 rubles. I'm Matthias Iweli. Don't you want some? Order a full tank, please, and hide the ad in the back.
Panic in China, fiery Beijing Jews against Iftar lantern. A fiery rain in the sky over Beijing. Mutes desert. Curation looks of state thoracic river.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine today. Join us now. Urgent. Russian generals write about victories on paper, but on the front lines, defeats in the south are holding key points and logistics. Ukrainian soldiers are rushing forward. The occupiers' manpower is bleeding out in a bloody slaughter. A sensation, a defeat that the Kremlin is hiding, or were the Russians simply driven from the front? Watch all the latest details from the front line right now.
Time is no longer on the Kremlin side, and in a prolonged standoff, Ukraine's chances of winning the war are much higher than Putin's. This is the conclusion reached by Western journalists who visited the positions of the Ukrainian armed forces. Ukraine's strategy in the war of attrition is showing unexpected results.
The combat equipment is defensive, but it's not exactly obsolete. It has almost no chance of any success, especially since even when they gather their forces, there is still almost no chance for a breakthrough. Let me just remind you of these words.
Analysts say that the enemy's constant losses and the adaptation of the Ukrainian armed forces to modern combat tactics open up opportunities for Kyiv's long-term victory. Russia was counting on a rapid advance in northeastern Ukraine. However, key cities and logistical hubs remain under the control of the Ukrainian armed forces. Russian generals in 2025 are capturing Ukrainian towns and villages only in words and in fake reports for the bunker leader.
But it's clear that the Russian army is unlikely to be able to accomplish these tasks. But General Gerasimov, the chief of the General Staff, according to certain leaks that appeared on social media, reported to Putin about yet another round of successes by Russian troops. He specifically and unequivocally claimed that the entire grouping of Ukrainian armed forces, positioned strategically near the significant Klebenbeek reservoir, had been completely and utterly destroyed, which in reality is demonstrably and unequivocally not true at all. And in addition to that, he also stated that Russian military troops are actively clearing the southern districts of the city of Kupiansk, which is also absolutely not true at all.
What is actually happening in the long-suffering but still unyielding Kupiansk was shown by operators of the 8th Regiment of Special Operations Forces. The enemy in this direction truly does not stop trying to break through the Ukrainian defenses. In the Kupiansk direction over the past 24 hours, there have been at least 8 attempts by the occupiers to attack. However, the Ukrainian armed forces managed to thwart the enemy's plans to advance. The defense forces repelled assault actions in the areas of Petropavlivka, Novoplatonivka, Pishchane and Stepova Novoselivka. Using strike FPV drones, the occupiers were driven into the nearest building, after which the operators cleared several structures where the enemy had taken up positions. The occupiers are also having a tough time today in the Zaporizhzhia direction, where partisans from the Tesh movement helped destroy a mobile enemy command post. Concerned citizens provided the exact coordinates and the communications vehicle of the occupiers, which was being used as a mobile command post to control enemy units. The destruction of this communications hub caused chaos in the occupiers' command system. Coordination between units and the transmission of orders were disrupted, which seriously affected the enemy's combat capability in this sector of the front. And here are the shots of a burning fuel and lubricants depot belonging to the occupiers in the northern Slobozansky direction. In the past few days, our border guards have managed to destroy enemy hideouts and communication equipment. In addition, the enemy in the northern Slobozansky direction has suffered losses in manpower. Overall, in this and the Kursk direction, Ukrainian defenders repelled 7 Russian attacks. the enemy carried out several airstrikes on our positions, dropping a total of 9 guided bombs and conducting 198 artillery shellings. The situation remains difficult in the Lyman direction. There, the enemy attacked 12 times, trying to advance near the settlements of Shredny, Novosilovka, and Derelova. Nevertheless, the special unit of Ukrainian military intelligence manages to accurately and effectively destroy enemy forces, their equipment, and drones. Due to heavy losses in this and other directions, Russian troops have been forced to slow down their offensive pace. Military analysts explain. According to
the results of September, Russian activity on the front has somewhat decreased. The number of assaults they carry out is directly proportional to the number of personnel losses they suffer.
Official Ukrainian statistics also do little to encourage the occupiers to launch these meat grinder assaults. Thus, September 2025 turned out to be a telling moment for the effectiveness of National Guard units. Thanks to the coordinated work of the guardsmen, the enemy has lost at least 677 vehicles, 418 artillery systems, nearly 200 radars, 17 multiple launch rocket systems, 29 tanks, and almost 70 ammunition depots over the past month. Meanwhile, the Russian army continues to strike exclusively at civilians and residential buildings. And it should be noted that this is not only happening in Ukraine. The day before, Russia's much-vaunted air defense system hit a residential building in the Belgorod region with a missile. The video shows the upper floors of the apartment building taking the hit. As a result, according to Russian media, windows were blown out in 15 apartments, about 20 parked cars were damaged, and officially there were no casualties. However, judging by the footage published online, the destruction of the building may be much more serious.
Urgent. Europe is on the brink of explosion. Putin is preparing an invasion beyond the edge of madness, with Poland, the Baltics, and the entire continent under threat. The Kremlin has crossed the red line and there is no turning back. The countdown is now in hours. A catastrophe that could become irreversible. Details of the impending apocalypse are coming up next.
The Kremlin is expanding the geography of the war. Europe and NATO are preparing for a possible invasion by the Russian dictator. Drones are increasingly violating the airspace of European countries. Such incidents have been recorded in Denmark, Norway, Romania, and Poland. In this way, the Kremlin is increasing pressure on Europe through hybrid attacks and preparations for a large-scale conflict. Poland remains the primary country at risk. The strike on September 10th is a deliberate, carefully planned Russian strategy.
For the Russian Federation, Poland is currently one of the priorities. One of them, not the only one, but one of them. Why? Because it is through Polish territory that a huge amount of military cargo is transported toward Ukraine and the Ukrainian fronts. And Russia is very well aware that if this crucial supply route is completely cut off, Ukraine will undoubtedly be left with severely disrupted logistics, which would then have to be painstakingly rebuilt from the ground up, and at that critical point in time, it could actually lead to some significant territorial gains for Russia.
And in the event of an invasion of Poland, Russia could prepare a force of 100,000 to 150,000 troops to implement the Suwałki corridor scenario.
At the moment, up to 40,000 Polish troops could be deployed directly to the border with the Republic of Belarus, and similar actions are being carried out in the Baltic states. In addition, a naval component of joint exercises is currently taking place in the Baltic Sea.
There are also increasing reports that Russia may attack the Baltic states. Since the start of the major war in Ukraine, Russian forces have increased the number of provocations in the Baltic region.
At present, it is clear that the Russian Federation does not have the forces for a full-scale invasion, as it did in Ukraine. Although our military notes that over the past 8 months, there has indeed been a gradual decrease in the number of Russian equipment destroyed each month on the front lines. In other words, the graphs are trending lower and lower, starting from January and February, specifically for 3 types of weaponry: air defense systems, tanks, and IFVs. So here there's a lot of room for speculation. Either they've started producing fewer tanks and IFVs, or they're still producing them but hiding them somewhere, stockpiling for some kind of breakthrough. Okay?
Another reason to start a war, the Estonian city of Narva. It's located in the east of the country and is separated from Russia by a small river. Even today, in the narratives of Kremlin propaganda, Narva is portrayed as a city where Russians are actively oppressed by Estonians.
These are roughly 200 to 300 of Gherkin's riflemen who could infiltrate a populated area, let's say Narva, and carry out the same scenario as they did in Crimea and Donetsk. They seized the post office, the telephone exchange, the telegraph, the city hall, and announced the creation of some kind of People's Republic, then asked Putin to send in troops. This scenario is very well rehearsed.
Only in Russia, from all sides, they claim that they supposedly don't need a war with Europe and NATO. For example, former President Medvedev insists that Russia has always come to Europe only as a liberator, not as an invader. And also, Putin's notorious accomplice, Maria Zakharova, started accusing Ukraine of preparing an anti-Russian provocation, allegedly using Russian drones in Poland and Romania to push NATO into war against Russia.
This message came from the Foreign Intelligence Service of the Russian Federation. Yesterday I saw a very funny message, and I'll explain why it's funny. The Foreign Intelligence Service of the Russian Federation is a paper tiger. Actually, it's not even a paper tiger, it's more like a paper bear. This organization isn't even respected within the Russian security hierarchy. They're neither respected nor feared, and even ordinary district police officers don't see them as any kind of authority. And so all that's left for this service is to come up with, to generate some random ideas, some conspiracies, just to show that their work is important.
In response to threats from Russia, NATO and EU countries are urgently strengthening their defenses, building a wall of drones, and discussing providing Ukraine with air defense systems to create a shield. After Russia violated Polish airspace, NATO launched Operation Eastern Guard. Denmark has also called up several hundred reservists, ordering the soldiers to report as soon as possible.
At the moment, air units are being redeployed to the territory of Poland and Romania. This is the NATO flank. In addition, the combined units of NATO countries are being redeployed to the Baltic states, and naval exercises are being conducted in the waters of the Baltic Sea. It should be noted that the newest United States aircraft carrier is currently stationed off the coast of Denmark. This is a serious signal to Russia and the Federation. In addition, French Rafale jets have been deployed to Poland, and these are capable of carrying nuclear weapons.
In fact, Russia began threatening NATO as far back as 10 years ago, with the main target then being Turkey under Erdogan's leadership. Back in 2015, a Russian bomber violated the country's airspace. According to Turkish authorities, before it was shot down by a Turkish F-16 fighter, the Russian plane did not respond to warnings. Now, Putin's strategic goal is the collapse of the collective West and the undermining of trust among NATO members.
Secretly revealed. Trump launched Tomahawks directly at Putin. Russia's defeat live on air. Urgent, the bomb is in effect. A secret order was received at the ISU. The world applauds. The dictator is in a panic and doesn't know where to run. Don't miss the strikes from Washington that will destroy Moscow. All the details, coming up next.
U.S. President Donald Trump has almost made the decision to provide Ukraine with long-range Tomahawk missiles.
Yes, I've almost made the decision already, if you think about it. Yes, I think I want to know what they're doing with them, where they're sending them. I think I'll have to ask that question.
At the end of last week, Russian dictator Vladimir Putin stated that the delivery of American long-range Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine would lead to a completely new level of escalation, particularly in relations between Moscow and Washington. Putin called the missiles not exactly modern and noted that providing these missiles to Ukraine would not change the balance on the battlefield.
Whether or not there will be Tomahawks, I'll say that I'm still not 100% sure. For now, it seems to me that it's more likely no than yes. But the very fact that not only have Trump's words been changed, but there has also been an emotional surge in reports that the US is considering a much broader range of weapons that they could sell to their European partners for Ukraine. This really does change the rules of the game, and it's yet another form of pressure, first and foremost on Putin's inner circle, because they are being made to clearly understand that if they were hoping a change of power in the US would bring them victory, that same change of power in the US could bring Ukraine Tomahawks, which would come for them.
The saga of transferring these missiles could drag on for several months. This was written by Yegor Chernev, head of the permanent delegation of the Verkhovna Rada to the NATO Parliamentary Assembly.
Because this is, first and foremost, a means of pressuring Putin and an attempt to force him to negotiate, and only after that, a way to strengthen our military capabilities. It is no coincidence that Trump said he has almost made up his mind, that he does not want escalation, and that he wants to clarify how these missiles will be used.
Chernev insists that the transfer of Tomahawks to Ukraine is a test for Putin and it may be carried out in stages. At each stage, Putin will be given the opportunity to back down and enter into negotiations. Therefore, most likely the supply and use of the missiles will be very gradual.
Tomahawks is a well-known term, and that's why we're discussing it. But let's note that there are other types of missiles that are not well known, which may very well be better than Tomahawks. Tomahawks are not new, they're not a novelty, they're actually quite an old missile. But these newer missiles, whose names don't mean anything to anyone yet, if they are also supplied to Ukraine, that will undoubtedly be a huge problem for Russia.
Putin's lies about negotiations could result in the US transferring Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine. This idea was expressed by former US Special Representative Kurt Volker. Volker believes that Russian President Vladimir Putin personally misled the American president. This refers to Putin's promise to Trump to hold negotiations with Zelensky, which Trump announced at the White House after meeting with Putin in Alaska.
I think there are indications. One of these indications, by the way, is the ongoing strikes on Russian oil refineries. Biden, Trump's predecessor, reminded about supporting Ukraine. At the same time, Gabriel said, no, let's not strike Russian facilities. And Ukraine stopped doing it. Donald Trump does not support Ukraine in the same way. Moreover, in the first half of the year, it was generally believed that he was more focused on Russian oil refineries than on Ukraine, but now he is slightly changing his approach, maybe even quite significantly. Nevertheless, as analysts again point out, there are no restrictions for Ukraine.
The Institute for the Study of War writes that if Ukraine is not given Tomahawks, around 2,000 Russian military and industrial targets could be at risk, ranging from Shahed drone launch pads to bombers in Engels.
That's all for now on the major other important news from the front. Watch more in the next episode. Stay tuned for the next episode.